All right. Welcome, everybody, to this training for trustees and finance committees and everybody who is concerned with them. We're glad to have you all on board. And to all who are watching this recording, we're glad you are tuning in later and hope this is helpful for everybody. We're trying to be um, proactive in providing some trainings this year. We've already done a staff parish relations committee training that's uh, online. We're going to start soon sending out the link to our district YouTube page that Travis has been putting together for us, and it's got that first training on it, and this training will be on it as well. And then April 15th, we're going to have a training for lay leaders and church council chairs and lay members to annual conference. And so um, Cindy Snodgrass and Susan Wheeler will be helping us lead that as our district co-lay leaders. So this is a good series that we're doing. All right. So it is basic too. And both of us have started off with our basic resource being the guidelines resource that Cokesbury puts out. This is the one that was published for the quadrennium of 2017 to 2020, since the last discipline that we have is still 2016 until we have another general conference. And so but it's not really dated. It's information that many of you have in your churches. You have these guidelines booklets in your churches. We have the digital copies of these that we don't think anybody will come after us for if we share them with you. So we will probably send those out. Both for the trustee one and for the finance committee one as we go. And there is actually one for stewardship as well. You can purchase the digital copies at cokesbury.com of these things if you want to look those up and get them. They're fairly reasonable. It's like $7.99 a piece or something like that. And it's a great resource for you to use for your teams at your church. All right. So that's kind of where we are getting started. And I'm going to turn it over to Travis. We're going to jump right into this. One thing that we encourage is everybody going and hitting mute so we can make sure we don't have background sound going on while we're talking. But does anybody have any questions before we get started? All right. Well, let's jump in. Travis is going to be doing trustee stuff tonight, and I'll be doing finance committee stuff, and we'll both be answering questions as we go. So, Travis, I'll turn it over to you to get started with trustees.
All righty. Well, just say welcome to everybody. Good to connect with you all in this way. And for those who just hopped on, just to give you a little caveat or a disclaimer, if you hear a cat in the background here, it's mine. He's okay. He's just upset he's not outside with everybody else in the household right now. But just wanted to share that there. But also, before we get going too, just a quick introduction myself, since I'm really new to this, haven't met everybody in person. I'm Travis Walker, and I'm the Congregational Resource Minister for the ESCO District. And my other hat is that I'm the pastor at the Wiley United Methodist Church in Wiley. So I've got two hats I wear in this district and all. And also, let's open in prayer real quick, and then we'll go on into things. So let us pray. Gracious and loving God, we give thanks for this evening, for all those who have answered the call to minister in the resource ministries of the church through trustees and finance. Lord, we're thankful for those who give their time and their talents to serve in this manner to build up your mission, your ministries in the church. Sometimes we don't always see the matters of the trustees or finance as ministry work. Sometimes we think of them as more as business items, but in reality, they are ministry. It is a way of proclaiming your hope to help us to be good stewards of all that's been entrusted in our care. Lord, help us to be the faithful stewards you call us to be, and may all of us work together in sharing your hope and sharing your life with all whom we encounter in our communities. We pray all this in your name. Amen. Man. All righty. Well, I'm going to switch here and start sharing my screen. Chris, if I could have screen sharing ability, that would be super duper here. Almost got it here. Well, while he's pulling that up here real quick, I'll just go ahead and just start talking here, sharing a little bit. about trustees. Trustees is the group of the church that's entrusted with the care of the physical assets of the church. And those physical assets could range from the church property itself, from the building to parsonage, to a van if a church owns that, or other property that churches can own. And all, oh, thank you, Chris, for making me the co host. And I will just share this here real quick. All right, there we go. And so if you can see my screen there, yeah, you can see it's charged with the care of property and for fruitful ministry. The property, give a couple examples there. It can range. The examples I've given, those assets or property can also range from property. Maybe the church was gifted some farm ground, and so the church has received that in care, and that can maybe be used as a ministry asset. Maybe that could be a future location for the church, or maybe it will eventually be sold and the proceeds used to further the ministry of the church. It can also range. I'll give an example of First UMC in Colorado Springs. Another asset they have is their John Wesley Ranch. And so the trustees would oversee the care of that property. So you can see there's a wide gamut, wide range of what the church property can be. And if there's one thing I could share on this point is it's very, very, very contextual, very unique to your setting. And that's okay. That's a good thing. We're all in unique places, unique situations. And so, of course, we're going to have unique needs. But these are the basics that we'll be going through of caring for that property. And the trustee in all this works so that the property, the assets there, are used to support the mission and ministry of the local church. It's geared towards ministry, geared towards supporting ministry. And so that is a very important spiritual attribute to the work of the trustees. The trustees, it's a committee composed of about 3 to 9, and there is a line in the discipline that calls for a gender balance there of having at least a third women or a third men. Some you may have more women than men, but you want to have some diversity there in who is on your trustees. It names out the women and men in the discipline, but I would include a diversity of ages, diversity of backgrounds, diversity of ministries who are a part of the church. The more diverse kind of backgrounds and experiences you have on this committee, and diverse ministry fields especially, can strengthen the work of the trustees. So diversity on trustees is important. I've also been asked a question is, if you're a trustee and you're charged with care of the property, do you have to have like a general contractor background? Do you have to be a carpenter or have electrician? Those skills are amazing. I do not have those skills, so I am in awe and thankful for all the folks who have trade skills, but it is not a prerequisite to be on trustees. Certainly that extremely valuable experience can be used there if folks would feel they're being called to use those skill sets in that area, but is not a prerequisite to be handy or to know those skills. In fact, I think having a few folks on trustees who may not have those skills could be really handy because they may ask questions or see things a little differently. So it's all a part of that diverse skill set that is on the trustee committee. And this is one little part of the trustees that's really kind of interesting. And this could actually be used to help connect people with the church. It's say you have a person who's been attending the church for a while or has been active in the ministries, and and they've not joined the church yet. They've not joined the church. This might be an avenue to include them in the work of the church, because you can have a few members of trustees who are not yet members of the church. It's also a way to leverage a broader skill set. I also think for our churches that have more seasonal patterns of attendance, where we have folks who may be living in our mountain communities for, say, the summer season, may be handy to include a few folks who are with us for a season at a time on trustees, because they would see things from a perspective, especially in that unique setting as well. So maybe having a person who is a seasonal attender of your church could be an opportunity as well. And this stands in contrast to other areas of the church where membership is required in other resource committee groups. I would believe trustees is the only one on the resource side, and resource being your finance trustees, pastor parish or staff parish, that membership is not required to be a part of there. However, I will highlight, I do believe it is required that the chair of trustees is a member. So there is some membership requirement there for the chair. So that's the basics on who is a trustee and kind of who the trustees are and how they fit into the church. So I will hand it over to Chris here with his on who is on finance.
Great, thank you. All right, do money. Okay. So I'm going to talk about finance stuff. Our mission. Some of you have memorized our United Methodist mission, just like everybody else, and that's where we start with both finance and trustees. It's about making disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world, right? And oftentimes, as Travis said, we think about finance and trustees as business stuff and not as related to the mission of the church. But I think that's a fallacy, and we've got to be able to think about every aspect of our church leadership as being part of that mission, and our finance people as well. It can be a mistake on trustees and finance just to put people on these two teams, these two committees, because of financial skills or their building skills, facility maintenance skills. We need to have people who have a diverse set of interests and skills and look at these matters through the lens of stewardship. So I want to make sure to do that. And this applies to both trustees and finance. We think about how in Scripture, resources, money are not things that reflect how good we are. It's said in many places in Scripture, and this is where the prosperity gospel comes from. It says in many places that we can find ourselves with lots of resources and really blessed. But it's not about how good we are. It's about how good God is and what God is enabling us and empowering us to do with those things. And from Genesis 1, it talks about how we are stewards of God's provision. So thinking about all of those gifts that we have, all of those resources we have as things that we are to put to use for God's kingdom and kingdom. Giving isn't optional for us as people of God. We are expected to give back. That none of what we have is ours. It is all God's, and we are stewards of it, and we are always giving back to God and God's work, God's mission in the world, what God gave us to do that with. 2 Corinthians, it talks about God loving a cheerful giver. We aren't expected to be resentful, and our giving, it is supposed to be something we give from our heart and as people of God. Finally, money is dangerous. The love of money being the root of all evil, right? Money can be an idol. It can be a force for disruption. And I think for both trustees and finance committees, it's really important to keep that in mind, right? That we don't begin to hoard wealth. We think about everything that we do with our wealth is something that is supposed to go towards the mission document, just for worldly security and prestige. Matthew talks about how no one can serve two masters, and that's really something we need to keep in mind. And John Wesley, he had some distinctive things to say. That the biggest one for us in terms of what we're going to talk about tonight, when he thought about money, he thought about how you should do three things. You should gain or earn as much as you can. You should save as much as you can, and then give all you can. And sometimes we get stuck after those first two, gaining as much and saving as much as we can, and we forget to give where you can. So these are just some parameters for us in thinking about our jobs as trustees and finance committees. Who's on the finance committee? Okay, this is the committee in the church that is pretty well delineated about who's supposed to be on it. And it's mostly folks who have other roles in the church, because all those roles relate to the financial stewardship of the church. So the chair of the committee, and that's the person that can be selected by your church conference. Every year the pastor is on it. The lay member of annual conference is on the church council chairperson. A representative from the SPRC or the staff parish relations team, a representative from the trustees. If you have a stewardship team or committee, we'll mention that in a little while, that person would be on this committee. The lay leader, the financial secretary, the treasurer, the business administrator, if you have one, and then your charge conference or your church leadership can also elect and appoint at-large members to the finance committee. Any members of the committee, like especially this can happen sometimes with financial secretaries, business administrators, folks like their church secretaries, even anybody who's paid by the church, apart from the pastor, can serve on this committee, but without vote. And that's all part of maintaining the integrity of the committee and avoiding conflicts of interest, that sort of thing. And the committee should meet at least quarterly. It goes about its work. I want to say just a couple things about treasurer and financial secretary real quick, since these are folks who are on this committee and the roles that every church should have in their church. So the treasurer is the one who carries out most of the financial decisions made by the finance committee. In those three general areas that are listed there: fund disbursement, money disbursement. So they prepare checks to pay the bills, but it's really important that they not be the only signer of those checks. They either need to be a signer, would require more than one signer, or there needs to be another signer. It's one of those internal controls we talk about. And they prepare payroll and do everything related to that. Reporting, so they maintain adequate records and also prepare monthly reports for the pastor and finance committee to keep track of the church's finances. And then they also pay attention to monthly remittances to the conference for special offerings, for mission shares, for insurance and benefits for pastor, if you have one. And finally, they maintain relationships with the leadership of the local church, with the pastor, and also with the annual conference treasurer and the responsible stewardship staff. The financial secretary, where the treasurer handles the money going out, the financial secretary handles the money coming in. With broad supervision for these things, for supervising the offering counts, so the money that comes in on Sundays during the week, making sure that the procedures are in place for that. Taking responsibility for, even if they're not the one always doing it, for prompt depositing of cash and other offerings, making sure that those offerings are intact. One of the things that I've always been tempted in my churches to do is, if we had a small expense and there was some cash in the Sunday offering plate, that we could just take some of that cash and pay for something. That's not a best practice in our work. It should always be unrelated people who are enlisted in each of the procedures, processes, and practices of your local church around money. That's another internal control thing, and should provide a summary of deposit to the treasurer. Finally, keeping records of contributions. That's the thing that so many of us think about the financial secretary doing. They pay attention and keep records of who is giving what on Sundays and in between. They maintain separate records for each steward or donor. They provide giving statements quarterly if possible and annually for sure, so that folks can use those for their taxes. And the basic responsibilities of the finance committee: oversees stewardship, compile the annual budget, raise sufficient income to meet the budget. This is one of the things that some of our finance committees don't know is their job. But the finance committee it really is their job not just to say this is the dollar amount that we have and let's fit everything within it, but to really take that stewardship responsibility on, either itself or to create a stewardship team to do that work for the local church. They administer the funds received by the church. They make sure the offering is counted and deposited. They disperse funds. They establish internal control policies, and then they review and report on those every year to make sure they are up to date and doing the job they're supposed to do to safeguard the finances of the church. They provide for an annual audit of church financial statements, and we'll look at that in a little bit. They report to the yearly charge conference on that audit. There's a report we turn in every year as part of an annual reporting. Recommend proper depositories for church funds. So what banks and what financial institutions do we use? Use contributions that are in line with donors' intent. So paying attention to what people are giving their money for, and then reporting at least annually to the church council all the designated funds that are separate from the church budget that may be designated or restricted. Okay. Travis, I've been talking long enough. I'm going to turn it back over to you to do your next bit.
Okay. So one of the things you may be kind of realizing as we're going through this is that there's a lot of overlap between trustees and finance. There's a lot of things kind of touch base, have certain contact points. As you saw, there was a person on finance who is a trustee rep, and so there's intentional communication across these two groups. So we can notice that theme. That's kind of why we're together this evening on this. But I'd like to talk about here though is at least I should explain how I'm going to do the trustees side here. Is I'm a very linear thinker in that, and a very chronologically minded linear thinker. So when I was putting this together, I thought, well, I'm just going to pick kind of the whole year, the calendar year, break it down the quarters, and kind of go through the responsibilities and tasks of trustees in that way. So that's why it's organized this way. Some of these things, again, may look a little bit different for your context. Some of these things that I've mentioned here are also driven by specific events, paperwork that needs to be done in the Mountain Sky Conference. So it's been adapted to that. But again, it's all in context, and just adapt as you need. But if you're looking for a time to do certain things, here you go. So look at the first quarter. January to March, we're coming near the end of the first quarter here. It is required, though, by discipline that the trustees meet in the first 30 days of the calendar year for organization. And at this particular meeting or moment for organization, it would be a good time to welcome new members to the committee and orient them to the work of the trustees, and also go on a tour of the property. That would be, taking a walk around the church building if you've got one there, or maybe taking a look at the parsonage. Make sure the current tenant is there, knows you're coming by before you do that. Also, if you have any other property that the church may own, it'd be a good time to get acquainted with that as well. This is also a time where you can elect officers. You can name a recording secretary. That would be helpful to have, so you have minutes of your meetings. Also, make sure that the chair is named at that meeting. And also, at that time, kind of set up a structure of how you'll meet for the year. It's good practice and also required by the discipline that you meet once a quarter as well, but also work a way that meets best for your church as well, as long as you're meeting that once a quarter meeting. While you're doing that first quarter, it's a good time just to take a look at how things are. Is there something that is in need of, of maintenance? Has the boiler been recently checked and inspected? And if that's needed, make that a priority, a task to be done. For example, maybe there's some other things that could be added. It could be done later. I know in our climate, in Colorado, there are certain times a year that only certain things can be done or done well. Yeah, we sometimes have to wait for the ground to thaw up a bit before we could do any work that would require some dirt work. So again, you see something then, but feel free to mark that later on to be done as it works. A good thing to be done if it's not been done is to have an energy audit of property. Especially as costs keep going up on energy. I mean, that is just a reality right in there with death and taxes is rising energy costs. So if there's an opportunity or a way you can work with your utility or have it work with an independent contractor perhaps, and having an energy audit done to see if there's any leaks, anything that's causing a loss of energy, or take note of older appliances or an older HVAC system if it's in particular nearing the end of its life and could be up for replacement. Note those things, and so when they're replaced, a more energy efficient option is used if available. Also, if the church is incorporated, it's a good time to take a look at that incorporation status to make sure all the paperwork has been filed with the state of Colorado on that. If your church is incorporated, there is a little document you have to do every year. I believe it's done. I typically do mine in the fall, I believe, with Wiley, and our church, because it comes my way, I usually just do the paperwork acting on behalf of the church, but it does not have to be the pastor. It could be anyone on trustees could do that work. I usually just file it, give a copy to trustees, and just take care of it for them to make sure that paperwork is done annually and all. If the church does have a safe deposit box at a local bank institution, good time to just take a look, see what's in there, take inventory of it. If any titles are in there, or any important church records are kept there. I know some churches who are able to keep some very important membership records, like the master copy of the print membership records, from the past. Sometimes are kept at a safe deposit box in a bank. If particularly for the old records to keep. So definitely take note of those things, and if it comes up at some point in the year where they are, you can where they are. You need those items. Also, make sure who has keys for that safe deposit box too. It's a good time to track that down and make sure those are in good places. And as a part of the work of the trustees, you'll see this every quarter, but I've got it on here, is to report to the church council. Or your admin board, or if you're a single board governance, making sure who is kind of keeping the whole group apprised of the work of the trustees, and make sure that's done once a quarter. So everybody in the church is aware of things going on in the trustees ministry area. But also, it's a good way for trustees to receive information as well through a meeting with a church council. If there's an important ministry project coming up, trustees are aware of that. Or if there's a particular event coming up and it's also scheduled at the same time as maintenance on the building, it's good to be aware of those dates. And so things can be adjusted if need be. So that's kind of basic first quarter task. And so with that, I will hand it over to Chris.
Great. Okay. First, let's pause for a second, take a breath, and see if anybody's got any questions that have come up based on what we talked about so far. What Travis shared there about the first quarter. Yeah, Joe.
Okay, can you talk a little bit about the audit? I mean, does it have to be from an audit firm, or what
I'll get to that. Yeah, I'll get to that. You talk about the financial audit. I'll get to that in just a minute.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, when Travis talks about audits, trustees' perspective, there are several different types of audits. So he mentioned the energy audit. There's also an audit based on an accessibility audit for your building. How is your building accessible to differently abled folks? So those are the kind of audits that the trustees often are task to employees. All right, any other thoughts? Okay. Back up here. All right, so the way I'm going to organize my thinking is around the characteristics of financially vital congregations and what role the finance committee plays in a congregation being a financially vital congregation. So these are three roles, characteristics: financial transparency, missional budgeting and fundraising, and best practices. And so I will start here. Since Travis did the first quarter of the year, I will do my first section on financial transparency. And I don't know if you can read that or not, but we'll make these slides available later. But this is just my outline. So first of all, that involves clear and easy to understand financial reports. And those are things that need to be prepared monthly by your treasurer or the person designated by the treasurer to make that happen. That needs to involve a couple of different things. Generic terms are the cash receipts and disbursements. Oftentimes we refer that as our P&L or our profit and loss statement. And then the second document would be the fund activity report, which is our balance sheet. Where are all the dollars of the church located? What kind of accounts are they in? When we put all this together, there are several different types of funds that we talk about. Restricted funds are funds that are given to the church, and there's a specific purpose for them. It can't be used for anything else. Either a donor is given with the restriction, or, for example, if a church that sells a parsonage or has church building, those funds are restricted for particular purposes. That's a little different from designated funds. Designated funds are funds that you as your church leadership designate for a particular purpose, but that you could redesignate. So, for example, you might have a fundraiser for a particular project of the church or that kind of thing, with the idea that there might be what you make the plan, you designate those funds with the proviso that if there are funds left over, they would go to X, Y, Z fund project account, that sort of thing. And then non-designated funds, those are the ones that folks just give for the operating budget of the church that you're able to use for whatever the church leadership deems most appropriate and important at a given time. So transparency about all of that is paramount in the local church. Second thing is a strong system of internal controls. And this is all about being responsible and preventing any sort of malfeasance that might happen with regard to the finances of a congregation. You all know that every church that's ever had a financial malfeasance situation, every one of them thought it could never happen to them, right? And these internal controls are meant to establish processes and procedures so that the money is kept safe and secure and for the purposes that it is supposed to go to, rather than being vulnerable to someone who has their own financial needs or ulterior motives, absconding with that money. Any of you who've been involved in that kind of a situation in your church knows how messy it is. Key to that is the segregation of duties between income and expense. So between what the financial secretary does with income and what the treasurer does with expenses. So always having that as kind of an overarching umbrella, and having those two things separate and with different and unrelated people responsible for those two sides. In addition to what I talked about with the financial secretary and treasurer's responsibilities, there are three things here that are non-overlapping tasks. Your financial secretary might do one of these things, your treasurer might do one of these things, but your financial secretary and treasurer should never do more than one of these three things in the life of the church. So there's going to be somebody else involved in addition to those two people. So one is approval of payments for expenditures. So when you've got to pay bills, there's somebody who writes the checks, but there is also somebody who makes sure and approves that those expenses are appropriate. Signing of checks, that's a tricky one sometimes. Um, as I said in describing a treasurer, you should never have the same person writing the checks and signing them by themselves. It should not be one person writing checks and signing them. There should be some sort of a balance involved in that. So one person's writing them, another person is signing them. And finally, reconciliation of bank accounts. I haven't reconciled the checkbook in decades at this point, just the way finances work online and the great ways that we can keep track of those in a different way than before. But in a local church, it's got to happen. There's got to be a reconciliation of accounts on a regular basis to keep track and make sure that we know where all the dollars are. Other things related to internal controls, physically securing assets. When you have an offering on a Sunday morning, if it does not go straight to the bank, do you have a safe that where you lock up those monies first? How do you do that? How do you make sure that things are physically protected? If you have a computer with all your financial information on it, is that secure so that it cannot be accessed or removed? Do you have backup documentation so that if the computer did crash and things were not on the cloud, that you would have another way to retain records and the information that you're going to need to be responsible stewards of the church's money? Authorization procedures. It's not just enough just to say this is a good idea. The finance committee needs to have some policies and procedures for how you manage all of these internal controls. That's one of the things in the audit. The audit doesn't just look at the dollars and cents themselves, but also looks at the internal controls that are designed and put in place to protect the finances of the church. So that's where that comes in. Documentation and reconciliation, I mentioned that already. How do you keep track? What is your filing system for all of those things? And then finally, to have well-trained volunteers and employees. We don't just kind of throw this stuff out there, that we make sure as a finance committee that the people who are involved in counting and bookkeeping and everything there are trained. That they know what their job description is, they know what they're supposed to do, and why it's important, what their part in the process is. Finally, the last two, electronic and online giving. Those are things we can't just kind of do willy-nilly. We got to know how they happen. If you're using texting, if you're using email, if you're using automatic withdrawals, if you're using a donation service online like Banco or something else, making sure that you understand what all of their policies and procedures are, what they're requiring. One of the things that comes into play here sometimes is that when people use credit cards or they use one of those online services to give, there's the percentage that the service takes as a fee. And when we do that, when we have those happen, sometimes we ask the giver to add that extra $1.50 or $2.50 or whatever it is onto their donation. We need to make sure that is a donation. We don't charge our stewards, our donors, members for that fee. They may give us a donation to help cover it, but that is all their donation. If they're giving $100 plus $2.50 for the fee, so $102.50, you give them credit for $102.50 in a donation, even though we are going to end up paying $2.50 to the service. And last but not least, the annual audit. This is the fun part, Joan. All right. Got a whole slide for it, so we'll talk about this for a minute. The purposes of an audit are to reasonably verify the reliability of our financial reporting. So an audit does not necessarily check each and every check that we've written as a church over a year. Most of the time, an auditor looks at representative samples of what we've done over the course of a year. The audit determines whether assets are being safeguarded. So it's looking not, like I said, not just at the dollars and cents, but also at the policies and procedures that we have in place to to make sure that those dollars and cents are going where the donor wants them to go. And then making sure that the church is in compliance with the Book of Discipline, with local church policies and procedures, and with local and state law and federal law. Finally, what is audited? Well, not finally, but what is audited? The church financial statements are audited. The accounts of the church and all affiliated organizations, except for United Women of Faith, are audited. So the audit should take into account if there's a youth account, if there is a Methodist Men account, if there's a missions account, if there are different accounts related to the church. Each and every one of them should be included in that audit, except for United Women of Faith. They are, as always, a unique and special organization in our life together. And finally, they audit the internal controls of the church. So they look at what happens to a dollar that goes into the offering plate from the moment that goes into the offering plate to when it is deposited in the bank. What do the ushers do to safeguard that money? What do the counters do to safeguard that money? Who is it that gets it from the counter to the bank? What happens along every step of the way? So they're going to audit all of those things. Question that is, I think, Joan raised, and that is primary for a lot of churches, is who performs this audit. And so this can happen in a number of different ways. The bottom line is that it needs to be somebody who is independent from the financial practices of the congregation. So you don't want, what's the phrase that we use? We don't want the same person checking to see if our practices are being followed who are doing those practices in the first place. That's not a check on our practices. We need somebody independent doing that. That can be an independent CPA, certified public accountant, or a firm of some kind, a business, especially if your church has receipts over $500,000 a year. That's super important to make sure that that happens, that you have a professional doing that, because those are big stakes. It could also be an audit committee that is put together, again, persons who are independent of and unrelated to the church's financial practices. And it needs to be somebody who has reliable experience and or expertise in reviewing financial statements and records. Now, that's the technical description of this. In churches I've served and churches you've served, I mean, it's very different for a smaller local church and a larger church. Larger churches have staff who take this, and they have CPAs that they employ to do these kind of things. Smaller churches, it's going to be somebody else, likely somebody else in your local church. It may be that you have a couple of your trustees who know how to do money, and you don't have them involved in the everyday income and expense processes of your local church. So somebody in your congregation. One thing that some churches do is have an audit committee, and they have another church down the street or around the block that also has an audit committee, and they do each other's audits. So your Methodist church may have a person or a team who does the annual audit for the Lutheran church across town, and they have somebody who does yours. That would work as well. So it varies how churches make this happen and who they enlist to make it happen. But the bottom line is it has to be somebody who is unrelated to and not involved in the financial practices of your church. So, okay, I think that's where I want to stop and ask if you have any questions. Oh, so I just put at the bottom here. This will answer a lot of questions too. So you see this link at the bottom. It's on umcdiscipleship.org. You can just Google this. I will see if I can get this. Oop, nope. I'll try to put it in the chat when Travis is talking. But we have a local church audit guide that the United Methodist Church has put out. It's on a website. You can download the PDF of that. And you can just Google it. Like I said, I'll try to put this link in the chat so that you can click on it tonight. But this will answer a lot of questions. So if you go to this page that I'm going to give you the link for, It has the link to the local church audit guide. It's just a free PDF for you. Also has a video there that's about 45 minutes long. That's kind of a Q&A video that will help you with some of your questions as well. So, all right, let's get out of this. Questions about any of that? Joan, did that answer your question about who does it? Okay. Any comments? I mean, you all have been doing, some of you have been doing this for longer than I have. If you have comments that come up that you think would be helpful for folks, I would love to hear those too. So don't hold back. All right then, Travis, back to you. And you're muted, just in case you're talking. Travis, if you're talking, you're muted.
There we go. I got unmuted. I have no idea what, I've used Zoom, I don't know how many times a week, and I somehow manage to do that at least once a week. Totally get
we all do. Yep.
Walloped around there. All right. So second quarter, taking a look at things there. And so kind of looking ahead to second quarter. April to June on the trustee side of things. These are items that could be done in the second quarter, but again, your context may vary. Trustees, it's helpful to have an inventory of the equipment and to prepare a maintenance schedule if it's not been done already. If you've got again, use the boiler example right there. If you don't have a maintenance schedule for that boiler, it'd be a good time to come up with one for it, or any other HVAC equipment. For example, maybe a church copier might be also on that list as well. Or note that some items, the maintenance is done as needed. It may not need a regular schedule, but in the case, I'll just use a church copier example here that we have at Wiley. It lets me know when it needs to be have maintenance, and it's always when I'm in the middle of printing bulletins that decides to have a moment of maintenance. But that just to be aware of that and to give room for that as well. If also if you have any service contracts, if the church has any contracts for service around equipment, take a look at those contracts. If you have any contracts perhaps around maybe a cleaning service, take a look at that as well. It's a good time to review that annually. And also, I'll use the copier example. Maybe your copier's got a service contract on it. Take note of that as well. And it could be a whole range of items on that. Also, it's good to take a look at the insurance coverage of the church. This is just to take note if things are matching, if at all possible, to make things work there, or your liability amounts appropriate for your size of congregation. If you have any concerns about insurance, we actually have a person on our conference staff who handles that. Dieter McGee is a contact person for insurance, or any of our folks on our financial stewardship team of the conference can help with that. And also our conference trustees can be a resource there on insurance as well. So just take note of what the coverage is if they're appropriate, and also make sure everything that needs to be covered is. Make sure if you have a church van, for example, that it is on the policy. Usually we don't overlook such things, but it's always good to double check on that as well. Thinking of kind of those, Chris mentioned, trustees having different kinds of audits. So we talked about energy audit earlier, but take a look at disability access, assess the building or audit the building if the building is accessible for folks. Many of us have older buildings that were not built with the ADA, Americans with Disability Act standards in mind, because the law didn't exist 100 years ago. When the building was built, so there may have been adjustments over time, or adjustments need to take place. And I will put my personal plug for disability access there. I find that when buildings are modified as well as they can with this in mind, it makes it more welcoming, inviting for everyone as well. So definitely take a look at your disability access, make sure it's accessible as well as possible for your church properties. This one, I'll be honest, I have never done a fire drill with the church before. I've never thought of that. But in doing the research for this work, it mentioned the trustees could schedule drills if needed. I would say this would be really helpful if you all host a preschool in your church building. It may be appropriate to have a fire drill for the preschool, or maybe do I grew up in Kansas, so tornado drill, to do one of those perhaps with a preschool or with staff, folks who are in the building on a regular basis. Again, I'll be honest, that was a new one for me. I never thought about it. That would be an interesting way to go to the potluck of, hey, we're going to have our fire drill right now after church, and the end is the potluck. I don't know. Find a creative way maybe to do that. Find a way to help keep folks safe, or at least maybe it might be good one Sunday just to point out the fire exits on the building, perhaps, just, or maybe every now and then just point those out, before worship, just not to scare folks, but to, hey, if something happens here, here's the best way to get out of here if you need to, perhaps. And again, as I mentioned before, communication is the thing that keeps us going, keeps us collaborating and on focus for the mission of Christ. So report to the church council so you can share the work of the trustees, and the trustees can hear what else is going on, so we can use all of our resources as well as possible for the church. So that's what I want to cover there and that section there. Any questions real quick? All righty, Chris. Well, I'll hand it back to you. Back to you.
Great. Okay. Well, I'll stay off of the slide for just a second. I had a thought about the audit. One question comes up about when that needs to happen. We have to, if you can unshare there, Travis.
Sorry.
The audit, we have to turn in a report of the audit every year when we turn in our paperwork in January. It is pretty difficult to get an audit done between December 31st and January 15th when those papers are generally due. So what you'll notice is that the audit that is due in January is actually the audit for the previous year. So the one that was due January 15th of 2024 is actually the financial audit for 2022. The audit for 2023 will be due next January when you turn in those reports. So you've got time to make that audit happen once the year is up. I mean, most of us don't have our finances wrapped up for our local church by January 15th. We've still got some things outstanding that we're taking care of in terms of expenses or giving even. So that pressure is off for that. So you may have any other questions come up about audits before we move on to the next thing? All right. Okay, so the next piece for me of those three characteristics of a vital congregation in this area of finance. Come on, there we go. Next section is missional budgeting and fundraising. Mission is always first for us in the church, and so we want to keep that front and center for you as a finance team and as trustees. We want to make sure that all that you're doing is not just to be fiscally responsible, but missionally responsible in what you're doing. Sometimes the choices that we make, if someone from outside were to look at them, they don't look terribly logical or rational or optimal financially, but we make them because there are principles involved. There are it's a little controversial for some people, but investments, for example, when we personally or we as a congregation make investments, or we invest our money in particular funds in a foundation or money market accounts or whatever, paying attention to where that money's being invested. What kind of businesses are we supporting? That's part of keeping mission first. And we might not earn as much if we invest in particular funds that don't invest in industries that we find objectionable to our Christian principles. But that's a choice we make, and it's a responsible one. So, mission first. What is God doing in our community in which we are invited to join? So you don't just take your budget every year and redo it with the same numbers, the same categories. You need to be in conversation with the other lay leadership and your congregation to figure out what's going on in the world. And so there are a few principles around that. Abundance over scarcity. And you may need to reframe some things. I tell folks when the last time I was in therapy a couple of years ago, one of the main projects that we had over the course of the time that I was there with Tim was reframing things from, geez, I should or shouldn't have done that, to, if I do this, it's going to impact my life in this way. Sometimes we have to reframe things because many of our churches are struggling financially. So how is it that you as the finance committee and the trustees, how is it that you help your congregation to shift from focusing on how much you don't have to how much you do, and what the things that you do have, how you can put those things to work in your community. We all know what happens when we assume. We don't want to assume when we're talking about budgets, right? We want to discern God's plans with our church afresh every year. We want to be able to look at what we're doing. Don't just assume that all the line items in your budget from the previous year are going to go straight into your budget for the next year. Take a look at those things. Ask those questions. Travis mentioned the printer earlier, the copier. Often this is a line that churches look at and they say, we just have to do that. Not necessarily. I've been in a couple of churches where we made changes to our copier contracts, or sold a copier, or stopped using a copier altogether, or but assessing those things that sometimes we assume are going to stay the same. The budgeting process has to be transparent and open to the entire congregation. One of the things that very few churches actually do is to open up at some point in this process, and often the budgeting happens in the fall. The church is looking at the budget for the next year, and it's kind of a behind closed doors process that happens with the finance committee and the pastor and sometimes the program areas of a church. But what would happen if you knew the timeline that you're going to put into your budget? What would happen if the month ahead of that you solicited from the congregation budget priorities and things that people would like to see the church putting its resources toward? That's one way to help you think fresh every year when you have that, and it helps your congregation to know that you're paying attention and listening and interested in their priorities as well. But however you do it, it's all open. One of the hallmarks of our United Methodist method is that we are very transparent, and the budget is one of those things that is very transparent in how we do it. Finally, we develop stewards, not just donors. And so for the finance committee and for the trustees to always help the congregation to be thinking about how it is God's money and mission with which we are entrusted, and not our own. And so to keep that in front. Now, how do these things translate into what you are doing as a committee? So your budget, when you put your budget together, that probably in the fall at the end of the year, oftentimes some churches will do it before the stewardship campaign and try to meet that budget with a stewardship campaign. Sometimes churches will go through their stewardship campaign in the fall and then create a budget based on what the pledges are and what the giving has been in the last year or two. You all have been a part of that process. You know how that happens. A couple of different things you want to do as part of that process. One is to anticipate, and this is where the year patterns of a year come in. Anticipate your cash flow. Every church has a different way of experiencing this. Churches that have a lot of folks who have fixed incomes, who have regular giving patterns. You have Miss Joan gives $150 check the second Sunday of every month, right? Or this family gives this amount every month reliably. This family has a small business, and so it goes up and down based on how each month goes with that family. Maybe you have a lot of farmers in your church, and their primary giving happens after the harvest in the fall. So the money is the giving is kind of sparse for the first 6 to 8 months of the year, but then there's a big influx, and that's going to happen every year, and so you can plan your budget based on that. And you also know when your expenses are going to come in. When your insurance bills are going to come in either twice a year or 4 times a year, whatever that looks like. When those things are going to happen, when subscriptions, when the copier contract payment comes due, when those things are going to happen, and you can lay out the way that you're going to manage your dollars based on those schedules. Most churches these days have some sort of computer software that they use to produce their budgets. Not everybody does, but I really encourage it. And if it's a thing that your church has not done much of, YouTube videos are a great place to learn how to use, for example, Microsoft Excel. For free, you get into Google and you can use the Google Sheets. Part of the Google software. But those are ways that you can really, really keep track of stuff. And as you learn how to use them, a column will automatically add up to a total at the bottom. They're really great tools so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time that you create a budget. So I encourage you to do that. There are a lot of different church management softwares out there. If you're interested in finding a good one of those, we can help with that later on as well. But to use those tools, they're available to you in your church. Stewardship team, mentioned this earlier. You don't need to have a stewardship team in your church, but it's the finance committee's responsibility to manage stewardship. And if there's you may have a 1 month stewardship campaign every year. It could be in the fall, it could be in the spring. It may be that you're a church that it has moved to a year-round stewardship plan. So that's something that you have a kind of a pattern every year. Think about the way that you present the stewardship opportunities for your people over the course of a whole year. It's up to your finance committee whether you have a special team to do that work, or if the whole finance committee is going to do that work together. And finally, this one is it's not something that most of our finance committees do. It's in the guidelines book, but measurement. How do you encourage your church to assess and evaluate how effective your giving has been over the course of a year, and where the spending has happened that has seemed to follow your mission most actively? What parts of your budget have made disciples most effectively? What parts of your budget have changed the world? That sort of thing. And as you present, some of you there are ways to present your budget in different formats. One is to show the spreadsheets. Some people love to see the spreadsheets with the columns and the rows and the dollars and cents. And some folks, it's more helpful for them to hear you describe a narrative budget where you break down your budget into mission and ministry areas in the life of your church, and describe where that money's going. So rather than giving the spreadsheet to everybody, you may break it down into missions and children and family, and have these different areas, and how much money from your budget goes into those areas. Maybe show people a pie chart rather than the spreadsheet. So those are ways to present your budget to your church and be transparent, providing all the information somebody might want or need in ways that folks can digest. All right. That's it for that one. Any questions or comments about missional budgeting and fundraising? All right, Travis.
All righty. Let me switch get my screen back up here again. All right. Well, let's take a look at a few more task trustees, kind of in time of thinking of the time of the third quarter. So July, September. Uh, yeah, buildings are not a static thing. They shift and move. And so now that you're fully into the warm months of the year, taking a look at the building again, taking stock of where things are, just that continual walking around. I remember years ago, one of the trustees, when I was brand new in ministry and had to live in the first time I ever lived in a parsonage, just made a recommendation, just walking around the house once a month, because that's what he did, in his place, just walking around, taking note of things. And so, just taking that walk around to see if there's something changed, if light bulbs are out, or if that door is just, is still giving fits. Just take note of those good things there as you go through the year. And third quarter is a good time to take note of that as well. As you're starting to look ahead, as talking about budgeting processes, the third quarter is a good time to start looking at any financial needs for next year's budget. Taking note of any cost of utilities, perhaps if you've gotten an update maybe on what rates might be for an upcoming year, or you've gotten some new information about how much some of the services contracts might be. It's good to kind of get that information together and start communicating that with the finance folks so they can start working on building that budget for the coming year. It's also good to take a look at the policies the church would have in regards to bequest, wills, trust, and review the investment policy for the church if applicable. Sometimes when folks pass, they have given something to the church. Maybe it is monetary, maybe it is property. It's good to have a policy in place, and I definitely would encourage you to take a look and look at the discipline, for some guidance on this. If you have questions on this is one. Definitely do not hesitate to reach out either to Chris or I. We can help give some direction perhaps on what that might look like. But just to have a policy in place for that. Kind of sharing a little bit growing up in Kansas, something that was not uncommon was that the mineral rights would be handed over to the church after a certain point. And so, my home church had a policy in place. I remember my dad talking about it of when I was in ministry, because he was serving on trustees in my home church, of how they had to handle mineral rights when those were handed over to the church. So, it could be something kind of esoteric like that, that not, I guess esoteric, but niche as a better word for that. I should say niche, need to have a policy for that as well, if that works for you, or maybe something else entirely. It's also important to take a look at your building use policy as trustees. Who can use the building? How do you schedule use of the building? Who is the keeper of the schedule of the building? Kind of those things there. At some point, it might be helpful just to get a shared calendar going, of who's using things when. That might be a part of your building policy. But whatever that policy is, however it looks, take a look at it. Make sure it's still working. If you are a congregation that charges fees, for use or use for cleaning services after an event, take a look at that. Make sure it's equitable. It's in line with your community on those costs, and also definitely take a look at those. Also, trustees, as at least on the Eastern Plains, it's July is the hot month, and so we're using our air conditioners. So we know real quick if there's something wrong with the air conditioner, in July. But just inspect it, take a look. If you haven't, things have not been inspected recently, it's good to get it scheduled, with the local contractor. Or if you have folks on trustees or in the church who are knowledgeable of such things, have them take a look at all the HVAC equipment, make sure it's in good and safe order. And later in the quarter, especially with our Mountain Sky Conference, starting at probably about September-ish or so, maybe even August, depending on the year, the paperwork that trustees will need to do, and also finance as well, will start becoming available about this time if there's any updates to that paperwork. The conference website is a place you can go to look at that paperwork. If you go onto the website, there's a little tab there. It says, forms. You can click there, and it has all the forms, that are needed for church conference, but also by ministry area. So feel free to take a look at that. If you are struggling to find that, get in contact with your pastor if your church is appointed one. If you're not, don't reach out to Chris, reach out for me, especially on the when it comes to finding paperwork and things like that. I am more than happy to help you find those paperwork. So do not hesitate to reach out to me, especially on that right there. I'm glad to help you get the right things in order. And because communication is the key to life and the ministry and the body of Christ, always don't forget to report back to church council and hear their reports, and so you can continue collaborating and building up the ministries of the church. Any quick questions here where I hand it back over? All right, just double checking there. Y'all are very attentive bunch. You are not like I was when I was in school taking classes. I was the one causing obnoxious, noises. Y'all are grade A students. So, all right.
There we go. Okay, very good. So I will share a couple of. I shared the link in the chat to the conference responsible stewardship page. You can take a look there. I would guide you especially to the webinars. They put on a webinar the second Tuesday of every month that is focused on responsible stewardship. So it's things that your finance committee or your trustees, your pastor especially, should really be aware of. It's just an hour. It's like, I think it's at 11 o'clock on that second Tuesday of the month. Really good information there. I also put the link in the chat to the local church audit page at umcdiscipleship.org so that you can find that audit and also the video of questions and answers. All right, the last section I've got for you goes to the third characteristic of a financially vital congregation, and that's the best practices. So this is kind of a catch-all for some things. First thing listed here is missional interest above personal interest. When you're talking about the fiduciary responsibility of the trustees and finance committee, it's really important to be exceptionally above board. This can be a little trickier sometimes in smaller communities, but it can happen anywhere. That we have conflicts of interest arise. When the church, and this is, you'll have to make your own ethical calls on this wherever you are. But when the business of the church benefits the members of the church, always take a look at that. Make sure that every part of the arrangement is above board. Especially if there are multiple interests in the church that could be impacted and hurt by particular choices that a congregation makes in terms of who it does business with, that sort of thing. Also in relation to the things we've already talked about in terms of who in the church are involved in the different ministries of the church and the finances of the church and that sort of thing. You all know how some of these things unfold in our churches. When there is a big giver who gives a lot and doesn't just give and participate in the ministry of the church, but gives and sets conditions on what happens or vetoes particular activities of the church, almost in a blackmailing kind of way. This can happen. It's happened in a church or two that I've served. These are the kind of things that we always want to pay attention to and be in relationship with each other about, and talk them over and make sure that we are being as responsible and as ethical as we can be in everything that we do. And this was interesting. I hadn't seen it worded this way before, but talks about these conflicts of interest, both in fact and appearance. Sometimes it's very clear. it's just actual dollars and cents where they're going. It just looks wrong, or it is wrong. But the appearance of it may be totally legal, but the appearance of it may be a little ugly, and we need to pay attention to both the facts and the appearance of our arrangements financially as a church. We manage risk through insurance and training, and this is in cooperation with the trustees that we do this. We're paying attention. For example, one way the finance committee may be involved in this is bonding your treasurer, for example. The oversight of the financial processes of the church, making sure that they are safeguarded in that way, so that you are covered if something were to happen related to your finances. Understanding and complying with laws and regulations, that's really important around especially payroll, but so many other aspects of the church. One of the things that you all need to be aware of is that we have a conference chancellor, an attorney for the annual conference. With my approval as the district superintendent, a local church who has a legal question can use up to 2 hours of our conference chancellor's time at no cost to your church. The conference will cover those first 2 hours. And so this is one of those things that one of the benefits that most of our churches don't need, but it is there in case it is. And so for you all to know that, and if you have particular situations arise where you don't need a ton of legal help, and you may not have an attorney in your church or that you can talk to, that's available through the annual conference. Next one, there's honoring donor restrictions. This is an important thing too. When a donor does give a gift to the church, whether of property or finances in one way or another, and they give it for a particular purpose, they restrict the use of that gift, whether it's money or property. The only way that gift can be used in a different manner is if that donor or their heir allows it to be used in a different way. So we have to be very clear about those things. Sometimes, and the guidelines booklet talks about this, we're tempted when we have a big expense come up and we don't have the money in the checking account, we're tempted to borrow from those restricted funds with the intent of paying them back to cover, if there's a roof expense or, whatever. The furnace goes out. We don't have the money in the checking account to cover it. We borrow from those restricted funds. We don't want to do that. And so one of the best practices for the trustees and the finance committee is to begin setting money aside to cover insurance deductibles and to cover those unexpected expenses that come up in the life of the church. That's a contingency fund for those things. Finally, this goes to some of those gifts, potentially crafting a gift acceptance policy to safeguard the church's interests. So I was trying to think of an example. I've had a couple of them come up over the course of my career, but sometimes people want to give something to the church and restrict the use of the funds or of the object or of a property. And the church is loath to turn down those gifts, but sometimes that gift is going to hamstring the church in really difficult ways. One of those, the last church I served when I got there, they had half a dozen pianos in the building. Only 2 of them really worked, but people had donated their pianos over the decades to that church. I imagine there's some of you who have that situation where you are. Those just became big wood and ivory albatrosses for the congregation. They weren't doing anything but taking up space. Having a gift acceptance policy can help your church with that, and with financial gifts, for example. One that Al Strauss, our conference trustee chair, mentioned the other day, scholarship funds can work this way. You may have had folks give money to a scholarship fund over decades and have lots of money in the scholarship fund that's restricted to scholarships. And it may be that the policy is even more restrictive than that, restricted to scholarships for kids from a particular school or from a particular town. Um, all of our, many of our churches have a different situation now than they did 30 or 40 years ago when there were a lot of kids in their church. What if that fund is restricted to high school students who are members of the church youth group who are graduating from the town high school? And you've got $300,000 sitting there that you want to use the interest from. But all that money was given to go to kids from a youth group, and you don't have a youth group. Figuring out ways on the back end of those kind of gifts to make sure that they continue to serve in the life of the church is a good practice. Finally, we United Methodists are connectional, and looking around this screen, many of you are very much invested in that. The idea that we can do so much better together than we can individually or as local churches on our own. There are things that your finance committee can make sure that your church is doing. One is that you're remitting your mission shares, that you are doing your part to contribute to our connectional life together. And not just that you're doing that, and right now it's at that 13% that we are asking churches off adjusted income for mission shares, but not just doing it, but educating your congregation about it so that everybody understands your part in the bigger church family that we live in, and all the different ways. I mean, that conference attorney is just one way, but there's so many other resources through the conference and through the general church that we participate in as Congregational United Methodists. So that's the good word that we'll close on for that. So that is everything that I have. Travis, do you have one more quarter to go?
One more quarter. We're down to the end. All right. I'm going to get my little screen pulled back up here for the fourth quarter. And it's fairly pretty simple this go around here. I'm going to come back to church conference paperwork. If you're in the October, December, you've got church conference coming up. Definitely, this is the time to take a look at it and get it taken care of, if not done so already. It's something very important to do in the last quarter of the year. Come back through inventory and inspect equipment. Anything that maybe any task or anything also throughout the year that got thought of but hadn't gotten addressed yet, review that, take note, and look ahead. See if there's maybe a time to work on that, and check fire extinguishers as well in your church, your property, and the parsonage. And that actually leads me back to the parsonage. As you're checking fire extinguishers, and all, check to make sure your parsonage has one. And also the parsonage is part of the church conference paperwork is that there is a parsonage walkthrough document. It's a document, just kind of looks at things, checks, is a thorough look, making sure the parsonage is in good shape. It's a good check for the church, a good check for the family, the pastoral family that's living in the parsonage. Just to look at that and see if there's any maintenance needs that are coming up. Definitely work with, if you have a pastor and their family living in the parsonage, to give them a heads up before you start working on it or walking around, just to make sure everybody is in a good condition to check on things and everybody's aware. One of the things I like to do when it's time for parsonage inspection time, I've not done it in recent years, COVID kind of threw this off, is that my wife and we would have an open house at the parsonage, and that was a good time to do the parsonage walkthrough, because we were intentional about getting the house cleaned up and ready for the open house. And while my trustees were in, we just do a quick walkthrough of things. So it's a good time to do that. Do not put that onus on your pastor by chance, but maybe there's another moment that would be convenient for that walkthrough. So that's a possibility for you. And also another thing too, if your church owns a parsonage, but is currently being rented out, it's not occupied by your current pastor. It's also good to make sure the paperwork in regard to taxes is in good place. One thing the churches sometimes miss if they've are renting out a parsonage to a non-pastor for the first time is the church will owe taxes on that income because that income on the rental of the parsonage is not a ministry function. It's not tied to the core mission or ministry of the church. So you will have taxes. Work with your county folks on this one here as well to make sure all the paperwork is good. And if you have questions on that, again, feel free to reach out to Chris or I. We'd be glad to help with that. So those are last few things I wanted to share for the last part of the year. Any quick questions? I guess quick because I respect your time. I mean, I'm good to go for a good while still, but I know some folks may be wanting to catch a TV program or read a book before they go to bed. So I want to respect your all's time there. So any questions?
Oh, one quick question, just
Sure.
I haven't got any information yet on the district conference on the 13th. Is this all by Zoom or is this in person in part? Zoom's in person? All I have is when it is and when it starts and stops, presumably.
You'll be getting that soon. It's all online. It's an online business.
It's
meeting.
all online. Okay.
Yep.
And,
Travis, could you unshare, Travis?
Oh, sir. I
There we go.
I kind of zoned out right there, but anyway.
Yep, that'll be on
okay,
13th,
then.
April 13th. But we'll be getting information out to everybody about that.
Well, yeah, but I'm going to be gone a lot between now and then, and I hadn't heard anything. And the other thing you had told us earlier about equalization applications, I haven't. What do I need to do there? I can't get a hold of Leslie late because illness, I guess.
No,
But
she's
anyway,
actually We'll get those forms out to you as well. That'll come out pretty quickly with all the information about that gathering. So those forms will come out
okay. That's my question.
Yep. There's plenty of room. We got plenty of openings for that.
Yeah.
All right.
And
So let's see. Ed and then Elise.
Yeah, about restricted money.
Yeah.
What if there are no errors?
Right. Yeah. If you've done all your due diligence in finding errors and you're unable to, then the church council and I would encourage you to make it a charge conference motion and vote to change what is done with those dollars. If you've done your due diligence to find out if there is anybody who can you can contact and you've not been able to find them, then we can do that in the form of a charge conference.
Okay, and the other side, what if your church goes down?
We say goes down. What does that mean?
We're broke. Our church is gone.
Well, there are a lot of different ways that can happen. We definitely need to talk about it. I mean, that's whether expenses need to be reduced first, but yeah, I think that's a local conversation that we would need to have. That's one reason that restricted gifts can be a real problem, right? I mean, if a church finds itself on the verge of closing and it's got a lot of money in the account somewhere that they can't use, then that's a problem.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, Elise.
Under some circumstances, a church might want to sell its property, or its parsonage, rather. It's a parsonage. Where would that money go? And who has the use of it?
Yeah, parsonages and church buildings have special restrictions in the Book of Discipline. So there are two, I guess, paragraph 2549, I believe. You can take a look. I think that's it. There are two ways that the proceeds from the sale of a parsonage or a church building can be used. One is for capital expenses going forward. The other is to create an annual conference approved new ministry plan. So those are the two ways that money can be used.
Thank you.
All right. Anybody else? Anything burning on a heart or a mind that we need to acknowledge this evening? All right. Well, great. Well, Travis, hour and a half, man. Woo, right on. What do you know? Okay. Well, again, I want to thank you all so much for being here with us tonight. We're going to say a prayer as we close. I'm actually going to ask Carmen if you would mind saying a closing prayer for us. And once she's done that, after she's prayed, if you could unmute, just so we can hear everybody's voices saying goodnight tonight, right, as we take our leave. So, Carmen, you okay saying a prayer? Put you on the spot.
Okay.
All right, very good. All right, Carmen's going to pray for us, and then everybody unmute and say goodnight.
Holy and gracious God, I want to thank you for the opportunity for everybody that was here to be here. Help us all to listen to the Holy Spirit as we go forward in our particular missions within our particular areas and churches. Help us all to stay connectional within this and to guide us and lead us in discernment. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thanks so much. All right, everybody unmute and say goodnight, and then we'll see you.
Hey, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Good luck.
Good night, all.